Hi, I'm Jim.
And I'm David.
And this is the Practical Guitarist Podcast.
The podcast for people who eat, sleep, and breathe guitar. The Practical Guitarist Podcast is brought to you by Great Lakes Guitar Pickups. Great Lakes Guitar Pickups provides fantasy tones at prices a practical guitarist will love. Featuring top-notch construction, attention to detail, and a fully custom product, if you can dream it, Great Lakes Guitar Pickups can probably build it. Follow them on Facebook at facebook.com/Great Lakes Guitar Pickups. Are you a regular listener? Why not? David here reminding you of all the ways you can participate in the Practical Guitarist Podcast. Subscribe using your chosen podcast app. Review us on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, or Google Play. Find our Facebook group at facebook.com/groups/Practical Guitarist or on Twitter as @PractGuitarist. Support the show. Merchandise is available in our Threadless store at practicalguitaristpodcast.threadless.com. And donate to us via Patreon, available at patreon.com/practicalguitarist. Reach out to us directly via email at questions@practicalguitarist.com. Hello, Jim.
Hello, David. Hello, Sam.
Hi, Jim.
How are you today?
How are you guys? We have a guest today. We have Sam Miller.
Yeah, I'm the guest.
Sam Miller from Deering Banjo.
I was going to say, tell us what you do.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, Sam, please introduce yourself.
Well, what I do is I banjo. And
You banjo?
You
No,
banjo.
what, you demonstrate banjos for them?
No, yeah, I repair and set up and customize and all that kind of stuff for Deering Banjo Company.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I understand you've had like a long career doing guitar repair and working for other companies and things like that, right?
Yes.
So we will ask you, maybe not. You don't have to mention the other.
We're not going to
company.
talk about specific people. I know there's been some hubbub in the group, but which is hilarious to me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
But we'll get around to that later.
Okay.
So during banjo, right? Like for those people, because I know like not everybody's super familiar with banjos. They're kind of an American ethnic instrument.
Yeah.
I actually have a banjo somewhere.
Really?
Do you really?
Yeah, I think it's of my parents. But so if you're not familiar, Deering is one of like the premier banjo companies. Yes, you guys make other instruments too, though, right? It's not just banjos.
Back in the 80s, Deering made other instruments, but these days, I want to say, I don't know specifically, but I want to say since about probably the early 90s or so, the company has decided to focus exclusively on banjos because their philosophy was along the lines of, if we're focusing on other stuff besides banjos, we're not doing banjos as well as we can. So
Sure.
Yeah, so we used to, but at some point we stopped and decided to just focus on banjos only. So
I can be completely honest. When I was a kid, I knew about Deering. Deering's been around a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And when I went in the Navy, the only banjo I ever saw was a Deering. A friend of mine actually had a banjo on the ship.
Mm-hmm.
It was a Deering. Honestly, when I hear banjo, I didn't even know other companies made banjos. I thought they were all made by Deering.
Yeah, there's a few of them out there. I mean, the big popular banjo in the bluegrass world is Gibson. Like Gibson's always
Right.
The thing is that Gibson doesn't make banjos in the U.S. anymore, so they're a little bit different now. But yeah, they, the Gibson Master Tone used to be like that in the days of like Earl Scruggs and like the birth and the growth of the popularity of bluegrass was all based around the Gibson banjo. But that era is far gone.
Yes. So unless people are playing like an old Gibson,
right,
it's highly unlikely you're going to see the overseas models like in a Nashville Cat.
Yeah.
And that type of thing. So, we have wanted to get a person with luthier experience on here
Quite
Okay.
a while.
because we have so many dumb questions because we're stupid. And so we were like, you know what? We're gonna
Jim,
ask
speak for
someone,
yourself.
We're gonna ask someone with some intelligence because, as
Yeah.
you know, David just bought a Kiesel,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I've just bought a lot of things, and it always seems to be that way.
Yeah.
and so we were talking about the fact that Kiesel's one of the few brands that can come in and provide people with a decent guitar in a price range that's still in that's the mid-tier price. You
Yeah.
can gig this guitar and not go, oh, it's too expensive. Take on stage, what if this?
Yeah, I
That?
beat mine up the other night. Like literally last night, I beat it up pretty good.
Yeah.
And so you build for Deering. Now you used to work for another company,
Yeah.
and so I kind of want to stick, to asking you about the banjos. So we had a little conversation. We have actually had a lot of conversations online because I'm always picking on you
Yeah.
and some of the stuff that you're doing, and I love your memes. So
Yeah.
keep them coming. And it's part of my morning entertainment for sure. So when you were talking about banjos and sustain and stuff, so tell us a little bit about the physics of a banjo, because banjos don't make noise the way a guitar makes noise.
Ooh.
Yeah. Well, the basic idea with a banjo is, I mean, they're similar to guitars in a lot of ways. But
Frets,
they're
etc.
yeah, exactly. Well, and there are some other differences, like for instance, your typical banjo is going to have a flat fretboard rather than a radius
Right.
fretboard. But a lot of banjos also have radius fretboards. So, but the main, I would say the main difference is, with a guitar, whether it be an acoustic guitar or an electric guitar, on an electric guitar, you've got the strings are sitting down on top of a bridge that's sitting on a solid piece of wood, or in the case of a hollow or semi-hollow guitar, they're sitting on a piece of wood that maybe has nothing underneath it, or maybe a block underneath it. And then an acoustic guitar, you've got the strings they're sitting inside of a bridge, but they're kind of being pulled. But in a way, there's pressure being put down on top of a saddle that's pressing down on a piece of wood. And that's how you get your main tone. Well, on a banjo, it's essentially a neck with strings on it with a piece of wood that serves as the bridge sitting on top of a snare drum.
I was going to ask if that's a snare drum, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
basically.
it's not a snare drum necessarily. It's closest to a snare drum in terms of how most people would associate it, but it doesn't actually have like the wires underneath that
That's what I was going to ask.
actually
You
make
don't have the wires.
sound.
Yeah.
So it's like a snare drum after you flip the lever and open it up. Like
Okay. Yeah.
like Danny Carey does a lot on Tool. He does a boom boom boom, like when the snare drum kind of sounds like bong instead of tick.
Or when a drummer is smart enough to turn it off during the break.
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
the whole break,
Yeah.
all the music is going.
Yeah. Every
That
time you
sounds
hit,
like somebody.
anytime you hit the B note on the low E string on the 7th fret.
Yeah. Sounds
Yeah.
like the drummer farted.
So,
Look, we put a whoopee cushion under the drummer.
so just kind of trolling around, I pulled up you guys' website while I was looking here, and I thought you guys made some of the things I'm thinking of. But is everything you guys make made in the States?
Yeah.
Wow. And the
every
prices are like low.
Really?
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's our good time line, which
Right.
is kind of the entry level beginner stuff. I mean, that stuff ranges from, and I'll include discounted prices here. because we do sell out of the showroom some stuff for a little bit lower price, where it's like, you can get something that's maybe cosmetically flawed that we haven't thrown away, and it's like it'll sound fine. It just looks a little messed up.
Yeah, right, like a B stock or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
B stock. So the Good Time line, that's that's going to range from somewhere around say 400 all the way up until like 1200, and that's kind of the entry level line.
Oh, I found the one I want though.
Which one is it?
The Banjosaurus.
Oh yeah,
$64,000 for this thing.
Yeah,
What?
yeah, the $64,000 one.
Well, of course that's going to be the one you want, right? I mean,
what was it? The Banjosaurus?
Banjosaurus.
When I first started working,
I thought that said vegan banjos. It says Vega banjos.
Vega,
I thought
yeah.
it said vegan. I was like, what is a vegan banjo?
Yeah, right. All our banjos are vegan.
I would imagine.
Yeah,
well,
we don't
anyway,
use.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we don't use our we don't make our necks out of steak or anything like that.
Yeah,
No.
not like Gibson.
Gibson.
Yeah.
And then they saw him in half. Can you imagine that?
Oh my gosh, they run over him with tanks.
And then they pour salt on them. They ruin the steak, right? So I'm looking here,
And
and
ketchup.
the one that's always attracted me, right? Of course, naturally, is the 6-string.
Yeah.
And I did not know that was like one of the entry level models.
Yeah.
And that makes me
Really?
excited. Yeah, like $6.99 on their site.
I
I
know
mean, it might be very, but
yeah, it's actually funny because that's kind of a recent thing within the last couple of years. The Good Time banjo line has always traditionally been 5-string banjos, which is what you would hear in bluegrass, or like tenor banjos, which is what you would hear in like Irish music, or like New Orleans jazz, like that kind of stuff. We started to figure out that there was a desire out there for a 6-string banjo, which is a banjo tuned like a guitar with 6 strings on it. The first one that we developed was a nylon string version, which we called the Solana 6, which I actually named, by the way.
awesome.
Oh, nice.
And then after that, we decided to develop a 6-string model with steel strings and a radius fingerboard, just like a 6-string guitar would be. Because there were a lot of people out there wanting them. And, part of the reason is because some of the artists that we work with use those, and people are out there and they see it happening and they want to get one.
Yeah, in fact, the first time I became aware of a 6-string banjo was with Taylor Swift.
Yeah,
I know it's
exactly.
embarrassing
Yeah.
for some people to admit, but
I remember it being a big deal when you could get a 5-string.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
they were traditionally 4-string, obviously, and they were you're tuned to 4ths, right? But it was open C. Was it?
Well, I mean, there's a couple, 2 different styles of 4 strings that are kind of you could consider the standard. One is the tenor banjo, which is tuned to 5ths, and it's the same tuning as like a viola. So it's basically like a violin tuning, but a 5th. I guess it's a 4th below.
Right.
And then there's the plectrum banjo, which can be tuned like the top 4 strings on a guitar. And that's fairly traditional, but sometimes people tune the 2 outer strings down a full step. So they'll tune the low string down to C instead of D, and the high string down to D instead of E. And those types of banjos are usually used in like Celtic music or jazz music, swing, that kind of stuff.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yep. I remember that because the Jazz Cats would play it. I mean, I grew up with Lawrence Welk still on television and things like that. So, and there was still a lot of jazz being played in my day. And I remember when I saw we had a little. It was. I mean, I say little. The drum was still a regular size, but the neck was very short. That's probably what you're referring to as far as tenor, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was 4 strings and a really short neck, probably maybe that long.
Yeah, much shorter scale. Shorter scale, heavier strings.
Also, I got to say that the 6R 6-string banjo you guys do with the Midnight Maple fingerboard. That's really good look. That's a really good look.
Yeah,
Midnight Maple is nice looking.
All right, so I'm looking at the Phoenix right now because that's the 6-string Eagle series, right? And I got to ask you because, and this is a general thing, not even the Phoenix in specific, pickups on a banjo. Because I remember hearing about pickups on a banjo early on. When I first saw them, like I'd see Scruggs and was it Tubbs and Scruggs or whatever? They would be on like Hee Haw. They'd be on before that. There was Old Time Opry or something like that, and or Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah,
and they'd come out, and it was always mic'd. I never saw a banjo with a pickup in it until actually relatively recently. I don't want to say it was, but at least in the last 20-something years. So a pickup in a banjo, is it like a piezo? Is that how it works? I mean, I can't imagine because the drum doesn't work like the top of a guitar.
Yeah, you'd almost have to put a microphone behind it.
Yeah. Okay. So I do you guys mind if I go into a little bit of depth here?
No, absolutely. Go for it.
So okay. So you can a traditional banjo that would be used for, say, traditional folk music, like something that Pete Seeger might have done, right?
Right.
That's going to be an open back banjo. You're just going to see a rim that there's nothing behind it. It's literally just like a drum that doesn't have a resonant head on the bottom of it.
Right.
And the sound on a banjo, I mean, to a certain extent, it projects forward, but naturally it projects backward through the rim. So a resonator is what you would call the round wooden back that you would see on a banjo.
Okay.
That's considered the traditional bluegrass banjo, and the reason for the resonator is because the sound, when you play, it travels through the back of the rim, and the resonator has a rounded back, so acoustically it takes the sound and it bounces it projects it outward through the sides of the rim.
Okay, so it is still going. It's going in front of you, but it's going around the rim on the outside. That's interesting because I always thought it would like pass through the rim,
right?
But I'd never really realized that it would go around the edges, which kind of makes sense because the ones I played, they've all been resonator style, and you can hear the sound like better, playing it because it's right above you or like right below you than you would if you were like 3 feet in front of it.
For sure, yeah. Yeah, and so that's kind of the way it works, but the thing is that amplifying a banjo has always been one of the most tricky things to do because you got to figure the head of a banjo, it works like it works like a microphone and a speaker at the same time.
Right.
So as you can imagine, there's kind of a tricky thing that happens when you get in a live situation, for instance, because every little bit of sound or vibration that's coming out of the air that's surrounding you is going to be picked up by that banjo head in some way. So when you have a piezo pickup, I mean, you can, that's the traditional way to amplify an acoustic guitar, right?
Right, but it's prone to noise. If you've ever beat on a piezo bridge, like you could, or if you just palm mute, you can hear vibration if it's not set up properly and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's the same concept, but what happens is on a banjo, it's just amplified by like 20 times.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a battle because a piezo pickup is the best way to get the most natural sound out of the banjo that you're going to get. But if you're playing in a live situation, particularly on a big stage, a stage, if you're playing on a stage that, say, Mumford and Sons or Dropkick Murphys would play on, you're going to have a big problem.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, I mean, I have piezo pickups on my banjos, and I use them in the studio. I prefer just, I usually blend. I'll
I was
have
gonna
the
say usually piezo is like blended with
yeah
you know
yeah.
whatever else.
I'll plug it in and I'll send that signal. I'll send that signal to the board, and then but I'll also have I'll also put a condenser mic on it and just have the physical acoustic sound of the banjo mic'd, and then you can kind of you can you can blend and mix those signals as whatever you need to do with them to make the recording sound like you want it to sound.
And the hardest part, like at least in my mind, to doing this is the phasing issues, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah, and you do have to work with that a little bit. But here's the thing. So that's always been the struggle in the banjo amplification world, right? Like figuring out how to get this. How do you strike the balance between having a good sound and also controlling noise and feedback and all that kind of stuff. Um, so a number of years ago, Deering started working with a guy named John Kavanaugh, and
Okay.
he developed a banjo pickup system. There's actually he'll punch holes in the head of a banjo and install a humbucker pickup on the head.
Mm-hmm.
And but the thing is, the way that it's wired and the magnets that he uses, I can't tell you specifics about what he does, but you can look him up on the internet. Kavanjo pickups, Kavanjo. It's he essentially he wires them in a way where they're voiced to work specifically for tones that you would want on a banjo. So for people that play banjo live on bigger stages where they need a lot more volume and they don't want to feed back, this has been kind of a really good way to do that. Now, other companies have developed similar things, like my personal banjo that I have. I don't have a Kavanjo pickup on mine. I have an EMG pickup that's designed to do kind of the same thing. It's a humbucker that gets installed underneath the head,
Right.
and it works exactly like an electric guitar pickup.
Yeah.
You know.
So are these pickups voice neutral? I mean, that's my assumption, is because you're trying to emulate the sound of like the actual banjo.
Yeah. They're. I again, I don't know the exact specifics, but yeah, they're voiced. They're voiced in a way. The Kavanjo pickups are voiced in a way where they're meant to accentuate the frequencies you would want on a banjo. So there's a lot of a lot of mid range. The EMG that I have on my banjo has it sounds flat. Like if I'm recording and I've got my plug going into a preamp and into Pro Tools, and I'm listening to it back on the headphones, I'm hearing a very flat, boring sound that can be mixed to be an interesting sound. But it's just for the sake of recording, it's good to get as many signals as you can.
Sure.
And then on top of that, I've got the mic'd signal, that's actually like mic'd on the banjo. So it's a couple different things.
Yeah, get your options open for mixing later.
Yeah, so the concept behind the Kavanjo pickup was John Kavanaugh wanted for banjo players to be able to play loud on big stages without having all of the sound issues, and he wanted it to sound like a banjo. Because people have put electric guitar pickups on banjos before, but it sounds like an electric guitar.
Right.
So
right. And I think that's probably a very unique thing unto itself.
Sure.
My affinity for the 6-string banjo would be put it in double drop D and then go out and play sitar like stuff. Because and I'm actually like, if I had that kind of money laying around right now, I would definitely be considering doing it. But that's I mean, that would be a unique thing. Like I would get one of these and I would put just a regular electric guitar pickup in it and just see what happened. Put a single coil or something in it.
Sure.
But that's because I'm absolutely insane. But the goals of the goal of a banjo player is to represent this neutrally and try to make it like a microphone based sound, right? And not so much like a pickup, because that's where you get into that. Like here now, I sound like an electric guitar.
Well, here's the thing: like the nature of the banjo and the way it's constructed. Going back a little bit to what we were originally talking about.
Right.
When you have a bridge that's sitting on top of a very thin banjo head, which nowadays they're made out of like mylar usually, or some form of plastic. Back in the day, they were just literally animal skins, right? When you've got a bridge sitting on top of something like that, it doesn't quite resonate the same way that wood does. So you're not going to get that much sustain out of it. You're going to get
they decay very quickly.
They do, yeah. They're not considered a sustaining type of instrument.
Right. Actually, it's more of an attack, and we talked about that because I joked about sustain. I said, why don't you put a sustainiac in there?
Now that would be interesting.
I've actually, I have a fretless 5-string banjo, and I used an EBO on it one time.
I gave him the big pointer, the EBO. Yes, yeah.
And you know what? It was funny that was weird as hell, but it was cool.
Yeah.
I put some delay on it.
I know I've heard that on a Joe Bonamouth record somewhere.
I would think that would be.
Yeah.
I would think that would wind up being almost like a theremin, in that it would work real weird, right?
In a way. The thing about an EBO with a banjo is it's like, once you put an EBO on it, you're eliminating the sustain problem, because you've now got an electromagnet sustaining the string for you. So all you're left with is the super like upper mid-range tone of the banjo. So it's a lot like a guitar on an EBO if you played it with a slide.
Yeah, I think I've actually used my EBO on my banjo before.
Yeah.
Many moons ago, but I don't recall what that experiment was like.
Now you've got to do like Jimmy Page and get yourself a bow. And
my daughter's violin is supposed to arrive sometime next week, so it's going to be really hard to keep that away from my guitars. No, but in actuality, like, I think it's interesting in your comment there, you phrased it as the sustain problem. So my assumption is that in the banjo world, like, everybody's still trying to get more sustain out of their existing banjos, or are they just kind of okay with not having?
Well, I suppose problem was the wrong word to use.
Okay, that's why I'm asking, because I'm like, that's kind of the characteristic of that instrument.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing. Because the reality is you could put a 5-string banjo neck on a Telecaster and play it like a banjo, and it would have the sustain of a guitar and the tone of an electric guitar.
Right.
But yeah, the characteristic thing about a banjo is the sustain and the upper mid-range. Well, you can fix the upper mid-range problem by EQing, right?
Right.
Again, well, there's that word problem. I shouldn't say problem. I have to remember not to say that word. But you could fix that. You could get rid of the, you could hone in on that frequency.
You could modify
in mixing.
it. Right.
So the thing is like sustain, right? Now, there's all these devices out there now that make your electric guitar sound like a banjo. And
it's like, why don't we just put a rubber band around the strings instead?
Yeah, and the whole point, if you look at them, the whole point is to kill the sustain.
Yep.
It's not even necessarily to change the tone. It's just to kill the sustain. You want a very short decay, right? Bam, bam, bam. If I play a note on a banjo, and I let it ring, it's gonna go bam.
Yeah.
Well, if you play a note on a guitar and you let it ring, it's gonna go far longer than that, right?
Right.
So yeah, that is the characteristic of the banjo. It's the upper mid-range frequency that you get from it. I mean, seriously, just the vibrations transferring from the string through the wooden bridge down onto the head of a drum. You get a very mid-rangey, not so sustainy sound, and that's that's the characteristic banjo sound. That's what you want when you're looking for a banjo. So
Right.
yeah.
Very, very cool.
So I got to ask, when it comes to banjo, so 5-string banjos are still like the way they were built a long time ago, where the 5th string is real short.
Yeah, it's like 3 frets shy
And
of
it's
the
not-
end or whatever.
That's not really your thickest string on a 5-string, right?
No,
if I
no.
remember right,
Not at
that's
all.
a thin string.
Yeah. It's very counterintuitive for a guitar player because the 5th string on a banjo, on a traditional 5-string banjo, it starts at the 5th fret. And
Right.
or on a long neck banjo, which extends 3 frets lower in the scale,
Yep.
it starts on the 8th fret. And the idea behind the 5th string is that it wasn't intended to be played in terms of like, oh, I'm gonna fret this and play. It was meant to be a drone string, right? So you're not even really supposed to, if you're trying to be traditional, you're not even
Right.
really supposed to fret the
You
thing.
wouldn't fret it.
But you know, players like Bela Fleck and Jens Kruger and guys like those, they'll utilize anything they can on the 5-string banjo, so they'll fret them all day and night. Now, the thing about the 5th string on a banjo, a traditional 5-string banjo, that's going to be your highest tuned string.
Yeah.
But in terms of like picking, it's going to be your lowest string. So
Yeah.
it's string number 5, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
on an electric guitar, on a 6-string guitar, you would have, you know, I'm a music teacher, so I deal with this all the time, having to explain to people, like, string
Your
number
6th
1 is
string
the high
your
E.
lowest in pitch.
Yeah, exactly. So it works like that. It would be like where your A string would be on a 6-string guitar,
Right.
but it's the highest tuned string on the instrument. So that's kind of a weird thing for guitar players to get over, because the main 4 strings, are tuned. If you were to tune your high E string down to D and only play the top 4 strings on a guitar, you would have a banjo tuning minus the 5th string.
Yeah.
Right.
So there's a lot of there's a lot of carryover in like chording. You just have to remember that your first string is tuned one whole step lower than it would be on a guitar.
Yep.
But then there's that 5th string. So it's just a whole nother, it's a whole different world. You have to, there's a lot of carryover, but you also, to play banjo from being a guitar player, if you're going to play 5-string banjo, you have to like change your brain.
I think that's the most important thing. Like, so I played 5 and 6-string guitar, or I mean bass, sorry.
Yeah.
And one of the things, I've
5-string
obviously
guitar,
played
really?
6-string guitar, but no, 5 and 6-string bass, and my preference is 5-string bass.
Mhm.
Even though a lot of your old school bassists are like 4 strings is good enough. If it was good enough for insert famous bass player that only had 4
Jocko.
strings available to at the time.
Yeah,
It's good enough for me. Yeah. Jocko.
He didn't even need
He
frets.
also- that guy also pulled the frets out of his
Yeah.
guitar and said, "You know what?
They were
you
called
got some
speed
glue
bumps,
laying around.
not frets."
I'm just gonna put some glue in here. Yeah, that's good enough. I'll keep the fretboard from going over." Yeah, not all of us has got that. I think-
Adventurous spirit.
So yeah, and so it made me think, because some of my favorite bands like that still use banjo, obviously Dropkick Murphys.
Yeah.
There's a lot of the like Alison Krauss's band.
Mhm.
And I never thought about the fact that these folks are carrying their banjo and like you said, they're using an electric banjo,
Mhm.
right? I should say electric, a pickup installed banjo,
Yeah.
which kind of threw me off, because I'm sitting here looking at the cover guy introducing the Winston Marshall signature, right?
Yeah.
And these guys incredible, right? So, and like you said, so what he's doing right now, I would imagine, is either he's fretting that 5th string or he's actually muting it so that it won't drone while he's doing something else with the rest of his.
Yeah.
Because there's so many different techniques, and people who have never played banjo, a lot of these techniques they do cross, especially in acoustic world. Like a guy like Tommy Emmanuel.
Yeah.
His style of playing would translate really well to playing banjo. I'm sure that guy.
Oh,
has done it.
absolutely, yeah.
And so I have to ask you, so let's say you're in the Dropkick Murphys, or you're in this band with this guy Winston Marshall. I kind of wonder, how are they getting away with that on the stages? I mean, it's like,
well,
it's just incredible to me, because I do know about that, that thing that you're talking about,
yeah.
and a lot of them use a claw hammer technique, right?
Yeah.
Where it's not a strumming.
Yeah, it's claw hammer is kind of an old style, like finger picking, where it's hard to explain. It's like your hand is moving in like an eighth note rhythm,
right?
But you might be picking like 16th notes because you're hitting strings with, you're using your thumb to down pick certain notes, and then you're also using your index and middle fingers to upstroke certain notes as finger picking, but you're also using the fingernails on your 1, 3, and 5 fingers to kind of strum downstrokes, right? There's a weird thing about that where, I mean, it's a really tricky technique to actually get right.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult. Well, a lot of blues players used to use that. Guys, the claw hammer banjo technique could be compared to something like on blues guitar, Robert Johnson.
Yep.
That's that kind of style, right? He was using essentially what could be compared to a guitar version of a banjo claw hammer style. But that translates over into other styles of music too. Interestingly, Les Claypool, for instance.
Yep.
Les Claypool's bass technique is essentially taking Larry Graham's slap bass and mixing it together with clawhammer banjo style, and he's using that to play bass.
Yep.
Once you figure that out about Les Claypool's style, you start to realize that his playing is not actually as difficult or complicated like as you always thought it was.
Right.
And I learned that because I play bass also. Bass is one of the things I do, not professionally as much as I do guitar or synthesizers, but I play bass professionally once in a while. And I've been playing bass long enough. I grew up on Primus,
Who hasn't at this point?
And at some point, I figured out, oh damn, Les Claypool's just using like banjo style on his bass. And then it just opened up a whole new world, and I was like, oh, I get it now. And now I can play a lot of the stuff that he does. Because I already had the slap bass under my belt. Well, the thing is, like, one thing to understand about guys like this is a weird thing about like Mumford & Sons, right? Winston Marshall and Jeff DeRosa from Dropkick Murphys. Those guys are both electric guitar players. Their first instrument is not banjo. Now, I saw Winston Marshall, like when Mumford & Sons started, before they decided to kind of use like folk instruments, they were all just kind of musicians doing stuff. Like Marcus Mumford was a drummer,
Right.
Winston Marshall was a guitar player. These guys all just came together and decided, you know what, let's see what we can do with like banjos and stuff. And the thing is, Marcus Mumford started playing guitar in like open tunings, and they just kind of developed this crazy sound. It's not actually a crazy sound at all. It just became really popular for whatever reason. At the time that it came out, it was fresh. It seemed fresh to people, even though it's a pretty kind of old style of music, right? Yeah, they just took like
Yeah,
folk rock
very
style
traditional.
music. It's very driving and stuff, but they just did it with acoustic instruments, and there's a banjo in there. Well, what a lot of people don't realize, and this is true of Jeff DeRosa from Dropkick Murphys as well, and I've worked with both of those guys. I've worked on their banjos, and I kind of see the things that they want from their instruments, and it's like they're just approaching it from like a standpoint of like, I just want to be able to do something that I like. They want to be able to do what they can do with the instrument they're playing to make the music that's in their head, right? So whatever that entails, for Winston, it's this. If he's playing banjo, it's largely because he wants banjo sounds. Because if not, he's just going to play an electric guitar. He plays like an SG, and I've seen him play it live too. There were some of the songs that they did the first time I saw them. Some of the songs that have banjo in them on the album, Winston would play like an SG on that song because the guitar is more prominent on that song than say the banjo. But then the banjo just adds a certain like percussive and melodic element at the same time. So on certain songs, you need it, right? And then,
sure,
so as far as I can tell, it's really just musicians going, what can we use to get the sound that's in our head? If that happens to be a banjo. Now, Winston Marshall tends to try to play the banjo a little bit more like you would expect a banjo to be played. He's finger picking, he's doing banjo rolls like your Jeff DeRosa from Dropkick Murphys, though. I mean, he's not doing that at all. He's using a pick and he's strumming it just like you would a guitar. It's just that it's a tenor banjo tuned to fifths like a viola would be. And actually, he uses what's called the Irish tuning, and what that is it's an octave lower than a violin or a mandolin, but it's tuned to the same notes, right? So you've got like G, D, A, E, but it's an octave lower than a mandolin or a violin would be,
right?
And so sometimes if you go see Dropkick Murphys, you'll see Jeff DeRosa playing. Sometimes he's playing electric guitar. Sometimes he's playing banjo. If he's playing banjo, he's playing tenor banjo. So it really just it's just a matter, honestly, of what the song needs. And interestingly, a lot of guys that do that on a professional level are typically, with a few exceptions, they're typically not using banjos and tuning them like guitars to make it easier. They're just learning the chord shapes that they need to on that instrument. So I appreciate that dedication,
right.
Like learning an instrument for what it was intended to be. And so I guess in a way I get a little bit salty sometimes when I see people doing, hey, here's this magnet you can put underneath your strings on your telly to make it sound like a banjo, and I have to keep control of that because in one way I can't knock that, I can't fault. Right.
Yeah, it's
right.
just
I can't fault a
with an
musician
instrument,
for wanting to just get a different tone out of their guitar. But part of me also goes, why don't you just play a banjo,
Exactly.
Yeah, totally.
Just get a banjo.
Totally. Well, and for the vast majority, I think of what has been popular music for the last, and I say vast majority for a reason, popular music for the last 50 years, it would not be a stretch of the imagination. I mean, I self-produce all my own music. Like, I'm playing drums or using samples and whatnot to create my drum tracks, and I'll either play bass or I'll program bass. But I try to do it, as performatively as possible, to get real feels. Like, it's not that hard or a stretch to think of everybody like being able to be a multi-instrumentalist in that sense. if you already play a guitar, it's a different skill set, but not a huge stretch to pick up a bass. And I would imagine that transitioning to banjo as a serious instrument would probably be basically the same thing. Like, it's not a totally different skill set, but it's definitely more tools that you have to add to your toolbox to make it happen, and maybe a different approach that you have to kind of come to terms with.
I think that's why, like, I was talking about me playing bass earlier, but I kind of lost track of thought. We kind of went in another direction, but when I play bass in a traditional style. It's very, overhand. I tend to use my thumb only in certain points. And so I can't actually, I have a lot of difficulty playing bass with a pick. I really can't do it. Unless it's like a downstroke punk song.
Yeah, like that's kind of how I am with it too.
Yeah, I cannot play bass that way. It's because I'm thinking in a different way. I mean, everything you do is different. And for the short period that I've picked up banjo once in a while, I always thought in the banjo tuning, and like you were talking about, I was used to that G D A. What is it? G D A and E, right? Is the tuning, and so that was typically what I used. So obviously the fingering was different, and so I would think in a different finger style, which is funny because I can play finger style on a banjo. Give me a guitar and I have trouble with it. I look at it as a different instrument and my brain shifts and I think this way instead of this way. You know what I mean?
So, I'm interested. You sold me. Like, next time I get into a place that actually has banjos, I'm gonna look for some Deering stuff and try to play some.
I really like this Winston model.
Yeah, dude, that's really a beautiful.
Yeah, that is a
piece.
Gorgeous piece.
I wish people would put that kind of dedication into guitars of similar prices, because to be honest with you, I don't think that there's a lot of.
Yeah, that's not. I mean, it's expensive to some people, but that's not extremely expensive.
Well, I look at the banjo.
No, I was just gonna say, like in the grand scheme of things, the interesting thing about Winston is that traditionally he's always played our Eagle 2 model. That's been what he's used for. I mean, he started using them on their second album, and he's been using them since, and he loved it. It's actually the Eagle 2 model is actually one of our lower, in terms of our upper line models. That's one of the lower priced ones, right. But he loved it. He loved the tone of it, and it is different. It is different than some of the upper line ones. The Eagle 2, it's like, it has a thinner flange on it. It's got a different tone ring on it. Like the this is for guitar people who don't know anything about banjos. Like a tone ring is a piece of metal that is attached to the wooden rim of the banjo. That the part where the head is tightened down over the bearing edge is going to be a metal instead of wood. That's the tone ring. The Eagle 2 has a different tone ring than some of our other upper line Deerings, etc. It's all maple, whereas most of our standard models are like a maple rim with a mahogany neck. The Eagle 2 is all maple. Winston Marshall really loved that banjo, but a couple of years ago we came out with a model that was similar to the Eagle 2. It had the same flange and the same basic construction, but it had no tone ring, and it was made out of white oak instead of maple. Winston came to the shop and he fell in love with it, right? Well, that was the beginning of his signature model, because we'd been talking with his management for years to try and figure out how can we do a Winston signature model. And, Winston wanted to do one, but he didn't want to do one until he was settled on what exactly he wanted and didn't want in it. And the thing is, we as a company, we didn't want to put something out there that was like, oh, this is the Winston signature model, but it's not actually going to be exactly like his is. we wanted to make sure that if we had a signature model, and we do this with all of our artists, any signature model Deering that you get is going to be literally exactly the same thing that we give to the artist that actually whose name is on it.
That's really
no,
cool
it's
because
not.
that's not the
and
case.
Sometimes
in
it is in guitars, but it's pretty rare.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, and so
Yeah,
that's the
but
thing
rarely.
with Deering is
Yeah.
now, and a few exceptions would be, for instance, like if you were to buy a certain signature model by one of our artists who, after they developed their signature model, came back to us and made some adjustments on it and said, I want this, and we change it maybe specifically only for that banjo. We're not going to change that on the whole line, unless it becomes a consistent thing that they want. If they come
right. If they have a one-off,
but if they come
that's a
back to us
one-off.
again and again and again, and they say, "Hey, I really want this to happen," that's when we're going to start to consider, well, maybe we should just change this on the line, because we want the general public to be able to buy the banjo that the person that they idolize is actually plays. So the thing about the Winston Marshall model, this has been a long time in the works. I mean, we've been talking about this with Winston and working on it and going back and forth with his management to get the details of the business sorted out for probably around 6 years, to actually get to where we could finally release it. And
right.
one of the things that's unique about Winston's, we've always customized his Eagle 2s, right? He likes to tape an SM57 on the inside of his banjos. And he would always have us install an XLR plug in addition to the 1/4-inch plug that he was using for the Cavanjo pickup, which was also in addition to the other 1/4-inch plug that he had for the piezo pickup. So he's, at any given time, he's feeding at least 3 signals to the soundboard to get his live sound. So one of the things about the Winston Marshall model he specifically said, I want the Cavanjo pickup. He liked the white oak body with no tone ring because it's lighter weight. But he liked the tone of it. It sounds different than the Eagles he's always played, but he liked the tone of it. So he said, I want this. It looks like the Eagle, but it's a different wood. He wanted a head on it that had a little bit less of a bright sound. He wanted a little bit more of a mellow sound that he could still dig in and get the bright sound. He wanted a Cavanjo pickup on it. He wanted a piezo pickup on it. But he wanted a toggle switch on it, like an electric guitar pickup switch, right? He wanted to be able to switch or blend the piezo and the Cavanjo pickup, but he also wanted each one of those to have their own independent volume controls, right? Well, another thing about the Winston Marshall model is it doesn't come with an SM57 installed inside of it, but what it does come with is it comes with an XLR jack installed that's made so that it's ready for you to, if you want to zip tie an SM57 on the inside of your banjo and plug it into this plug using...
You can.
Yeah.
Well, that's probably why it likes the lower weight, because
exactly.
a 2-pound microphone.
So that's the thing. When you buy a Winston Marshall signature model Deering, you're literally buying exactly the banjo that he plays on tour and on record. Yeah.
Very, very cool.
That's nice. That's a gorgeous piece.
We were talking about the price on these. The Winston Marshall signature is $4,600 retail. Which, I know a lot of people look, this is what I started to say before we went down that path. I think a lot of people have a tendency to look at something and say, oh, well, that's over $3,000. Like, that's ultra high end. And in the guitar world, that's the case. But actually, in the case of any sort of specialty instrument, $4,500 is nothing. That's a drop in the bucket.
Even honestly, for an acoustic guitar, I mean, that is a higher end acoustic guitar. But you go out and price yourself some of their decent
Right.
Martins, your Gibsons, and your high end Taylors, your really high end Taylors, and it's not that far off the ballpark. Plus, these things are made in the U.S. Like the other stuff I mentioned before. So it's I don't know. It even mentions on the Winston Churchill or the Winston Churchill,
Wow.
Winston Marshall page for the banjo. It does say that it's got the. I was going to ask you if you didn't mention it about the. It says it's got an XLR, so if you want to install a microphone inside the pot of the banjo,
have at it.
You can do that. It says it right on there.
Have
So I was like, wow, this thing is literally right out of the box. Now, I'm going to ask you a silly question. Let's say I wanted to buy one of these, and I said, geez, I want that XLR, or I mean that SM57. Would you guys, if I said, hey, could you guys put that in there for me? So I didn't have to pull it apart,
here's where
put
I
it
come in.
Put it back together?
Because now I'm the head of the repairs department, right? I'm the only person that works in the repairs department, but so it's kind of a funny situation because I'm managing a department that I'm the only person working in.
Right. Does your person ever tick you off and you have to like, hey, they're not going to do that today?
Yeah, the guy's always on
fire
Facebook
himself
at work. Gosh. Yeah. No, but here's the thing. I don't just do repairs. I'm also the guy who, if an artist or a customer wants a custom upgrade done, well, they're like what you were just talking about. They're not going to go to they're not going to go to the production shop for that. What they're going to do is they're going to bring that to me, and because I can now. So in short. Yes, we'll do that. But we treat it as a repair situation, so you're gonna have to pay. If
right,
you're gonna have to pay labor, and
whatever labor
our labor
involved.
charge, our labor cost is $120 an hour. So, right, it's a factory warranty.
But you get a factory warranty.
Factory warranty, and
have you hired?
And I guarantee my work as well. I guarantee my work in terms of repairs on top of whatever you're getting standard. So if you're buying this as a new banjo and you say, hey, I want you to install the SM57 for me, and you send me an SM57, then yes. Or whatever microphone you want.
That's what I would do.
I would evaluate it. Yeah. I would look at it. I would evaluate it. I would say, hey, you know what? This is going to take me a half hour. So that's $60. If you wanted us to get the SM57, we would do that too. We would just add the price of it. Yeah, we don't like to do that because it means that I have to. That's gonna.
Plus a fee.
Yeah.
You have to source parts and all that, right?
Yeah. In general, if somebody wants something like that done, I say, okay, you bring the parts in. I'll charge you for the labor. I give them evaluations. I say, I look at everything. I go, if somebody wants a weird pickup installed that's something we don't offer, but they have it themselves, I look at it, I go, yeah, I got to drill a huge hole through the rim. If you're okay with that, I'll do it. It's going to cost this much.
Right.
And
you're going to have a brand new banjo with a hole in the rim.
If I do it, it's going to look, it's not going to look like there's a hole in it. It's going to look professional. Right.
It's going to look like it was intended.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to look like it was intended. And what's cool about that is that doesn't really happen unless you're dealing with small builders in the guitar world. But like the cool part about that is that's how you get these weird one-off models that, later on become legendary because somebody got that one, 1962 Stratocaster with, the hardtail bridge and two single coils, one from a Telecaster. Because Leo decided to do something crazy for this person one day. Like that, I mean, that's essentially how that stuff happens. And so the fact that you guys offer that level of customization, the ability to like call up and be like, hey, do you guys have somebody on staff that can do this for me is great. That's part of the reason why I like Sweetwater too, is because when I call up and I order something from them, I can say, hey, will you guys throw this in the Plek machine?
Right.
And they can add that onto my bill.
Yeah.
And it'll come in Pleked. You know what I mean? Like that's that's the kind of service I
Right.
think real musicians would.
No,
actually,
it's
like,
true.
look
And the
for,
thing is, like, when you're dealing with people, there's a big difference between when you're dealing with people on just a standard customer level. And I don't want to say this in like an elitist kind of way. I don't mean it like that. I just mean strictly when you're dealing with your average customer versus your professional customer. There's going to be a lot more stuff that your professional customer is going to be. I don't want to say always able, because contrary to popular belief, um, uh, professional, even famous musicians often don't really make much more money than your average working person.
no,
Yeah,
that's a big misconception. Is that like everybody who
Yeah,
gets
it
gigs
is.
is like
It-
making
it's yeah,
thousands
it's
of
not,
dollars
and
and
it's
driving
not true.
Porsches and
Even
Ferraris,
really
you know?
famous people. There are super famous people out there who probably have far less money than you do, as a working person,
Yeah.
and that's just a reality. But the difference is they are investing in things that they are using professionally. So, and I think this is an interesting thing, because I deal with um our like our endorsing artists, right? I deal with all of our endorsing artists, from everybody from like a fairly unknown local level to the most famous people you can think of. And the funny thing is that
Sure.
it doesn't really change from the between those two levels. It doesn't really change what people are willing to pay for custom services. Some of our most famous players, honestly, and this is, again, this is part of the misconception. The assumption is that if you're seeing somebody on a big stage that's playing a show that you're paying a lot of money to go to at a big stadium, that they're probably millionaires. The reality is their income
Ooh.
might actually even be less than your average engineer. You know, and at the same time,
Yeah.
your local level players who might be endorsing artists of a certain, guitar company or banjo company, whatever it be, they might actually be pulling in the same amount of money as those high level people. So they're typically the amounts that these people are usually willing to pay for their customizations. It's usually about the same.
The To go along with what you're saying, I don't know if you follow Rhett Scholl's YouTube channel or anything, but I was watching a tour vlog video that he did, and he was talking about how they get a per diem, for food and allowance and all that. And he's like, in order for us to get a really good piece of gear or something that we're really excited about, we basically don't eat. Take the per diem and put it in their pocket. And like, you think about that, that tells you how little money these people are actually making doing this. And the reason they have so much gear is not because they have these endorsement deals or whatever.
Yeah,
it's
and
that's
tools, that's way more common than people think. I think there's a perception, and I didn't, admittedly, I only know this because I work in the industry and I'm also a professional musician myself. When I get a gig, I might get a gig where I'm getting paid $300 to play for an hour for somebody, and that sounds really good. But when you factor in all the rehearsal time, and then there's
carrying all your stuff,
exactly.
You're making minimum wage.
You're making the same amount that somebody that maybe works at Jack in the Box is making, or McDonald's.
Right. And when you think about it, I mean, guitar players don't do this as much as say a drummer.
Sure. Yeah.
But sometimes there's cartage fees involved too. So you're out there, and it's like, they're paying you. They don't pay you any extra because you've got cartage.
Like for local gigs, for instance, I'll give you an example. My last band that I was in played at House of Blues all the time, and we go downtown where we're playing House of Blues. Well, the thing is, they don't really pay that well. they play, you know, they pay comparably. Like they're not undercutting people. They're paying what's the average amount. Right. It's the going rate.
It's
But
the
here's
going
the
rate.
thing: you got to pay unless you're willing to walk. Unless you're willing to walk 2 miles with your gear, you're paying $25 to park. You might get a couple of drink tickets.
Yep.
But if you that's actually not that common. So House of Blues is pretty good. Like they usually cater backstage, so you'll have food. The artists will have food. It's
they
like
bring you
tubs
back
of
like a
it's
selection.
usually like tubs of rice. So whatever you get. Yeah, I mean, and
Wow, sounds like my kind of meal.
Some finger food. Yeah, I was gonna say some finger food
Spinal
and
Tap,
like rolled
No,
meats,
I don't want
kind of like
this.
what you saw in
I
Spinal
want
Tap.
large bread.
How am I supposed to make a sandwich out of this?
It's literally like that. That's the funny thing. It's
Why don't?
anybody who's worked at anybody who's worked as a professional musician
That's why I
in
laugh.
those types of situations, like that scene from Spinal Tap, that is accurate.
Dude, I gotta say, I gotta stop you right here. The best part, like, I played a couple gigs at churches. I've never really been a true P-dubs musician, but I have played in churches, like on youth nights and things like that. And I have to say, the best meals I was ever offered
Potlucks.
at venues were at churches because people they
Yeah.
bring this stuff to you. And you're like, what kind of potatoes are these?
Yeah.
Churches
because it's a
have
potluck.
mastered the art
Awesome.
of potlucks.
Yeah.
And it's funny because if you're playing in churches and if you're a believer in God, I think I actually call it I actually like to call it it's pot provision, not potluck, right? It's because it's God's provision, right? He's providing. So, but no, it's true though.
Yes.
Yeah, no, it's true though. Like,
no luck
but
involved.
yeah, I mean, honestly, most professional gigs that I get, the per diem is literally like I do a lot of hired gun stuff. So I'll get hired for one-off gigs or sometimes on a recurring basis to play for some indie artist is touring and maybe they need a synth bassist or they need a guitar player or a bass player, whatever it is, in town because something happened and their main person couldn't make it to that stop on the tour or something like that. And I've spent a lot of time building up my network of musicians, right? So, typically what happens is somebody knows me who knows this artist and they go, "Oh, I got a guy," and they'll reach out to me and they'll say, "Hey, I got a friend who needs a synth bass player." I'm like, "Okay." They'll connect us.
I got
the
this.
artist will send me the material. I'll spend the time learning it. I'll get it down. We'll have sometimes we'll rehearse for a quick one run through the set, like and sometimes
sometimes you don't
there's no
rehearse at all.
and
Sometimes
that
you just
happened to me. This
you get
one
sound
artist
check.
that I sometimes play with. The first time that I met her was the day I was playing her gig. And here's the thing, like situations like that, you never know how it's going to go. You have to kind of figure it out. Like you go, okay, I know that for a half-hour gig, this is paying $150. Okay, but initially, it's like, well, I'm not making that much money because $150 when you factor in all the rehearsal time and all the time it took me to program the sounds onto my synth and get the set in order to where all I have to do is just click through the presets right in order. That's a lot of time, right? Well, the more I play for this person, the more money I actually make because the less time I have to spend doing that.
Yeah.
Right.
Because you only have to set up once. It's like a tooling fee.
So there's kind of an accountability too as a musician. You have to be on top of your game. If you're not on top of your game, and you want to be in the hired gun thing or session musician, I do the session thing a lot too. I get hired to play for recording sessions. And that's honestly, those are the two main ways that I make my money in music. I've never made much money playing in original bands. Everybody knows like
no. Yeah, that's not not how you make money. That's what I do,
Yeah.
and we laugh because it's like, well, this is just bleeding heart stuff because I know,
Yeah.
like I know it's just for my own
Yeah.
personal selfish thing, and as I've gotten older, it's like,
Yeah.
well, the allure of money is out there, and I'm kind of like,
I've only just recently gotten to where, like this month and next month, I'll
Right.
make enough to pay my mortgage each month to, through music.
Sure.
I don't need to. It's a side thing for me, but the truth of the matter is, it would be there. But I will say this, because I wanted to ask you a little bit more. So I remember we had when I was doing country in upstate New York, we had a similar thing. Management reached out to us. They had these young ladies coming into town that were doing a showcase, and they were Nashville women, and they didn't have any band members. They were just coming as vocalists. It was kind of like The Voice, meets upstate New York, right? So they sent us the material, and no singer, and so it was like, learn these songs, and they were all original. One cover. There was 14 originals and one cover, or 12 originals and one cover, something like that. And I had to sing. I had to not only know their parts, I had to sing them. So I was a bass player for the band and sing the parts up until, and just like you, that day we met the girls when they came into town, and they met us backstage, and they were like, "Oh, you guys are so great. We love you." They were so sweet, so very nice.
Mhm.
Most of them under the age of 18. And then we were up there, we did our thing, and then they came on stage and did their thing. And it was a good pay, but I
Right.
worked way harder than the money.
Yeah,
was-
well, I mean, that's kind of how it works. It's really interesting because one of the things I was getting at with what I was saying was, you get stuff like, David, you were mentioning like per diem, right? A band gets per diem, and you can use that money however you want. So the last gig that I did, it was it was $200 for a 45-minute set. I'm in San Diego. I
Right.
had to drive up to LA. That was about a 2-hour drive. Gas was covered, and there was a per diem, right? So that didn't
Right.
cut into what I was getting paid for the gig. And that's nice, but the vast majority of people that are going to hire you to do these things are not going to do that.
no,
Right.
no, per diem is for
Right.
touring artists, really. I mean, that's
Right.
yeah, because that's when you're on the road. But like, if any of the three of
Mhm.
us, because we have day jobs, right? If any of the three of us were to be doing
Sure.
stuff, it would be like session work, one-off gigs, that kind of thing. And
So there was a gig I did in upstate New York. I don't want to mention the band, but they were like a 60s and early 70s vocal group. And one of the guys was sick, couldn't sing that night. And there were a couple of dates they needed to cover in outside of the city, north of the city. And they called me, a guy just like you. I have connections, I have people, and so they called a guy who knew me, who said, "Hey Jim, they need a third part, need somebody to sing the fifth to these songs." And I was like, "Are you kidding? That band?" And I was like, "Of course I'll do it." I didn't even ask how much money it paid. I was just excited to be there. Well, here's what they did with me. So to hide the fact that the guy was sick, they put him on stage. I stood backstage with a set of these on.
headphones.
And I sang my part. They were nice enough to send me a recording with just my part on it. So there was like a lead tone that they put in one ear, and then I had monitor of my voice in the other ear. So I was able to hear what I was supposed to sing. And of course I'd get a click, everything else. And it was all very, but I was just so happy to sing for a band like that. But I didn't get, I got a per diem because I had to spend the night because it was certain distance.
Yeah,
They kind of had to. It was union type stuff, but I didn't get
man.
mileage, which was about 90 miles one way. And but they did feed me. They were nice enough to let me hang with the band backstage. There's pictures, but it was one of those things. I was just excited to
Yeah.
to sing with a group of people I had grown up
That's cool.
listening to and singing their music. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I know every lyric. Well, you only have to sing the fifth, and you're only going to sing. So they had like these sheets. They gave me paper. This is how far back it was. Gave me paper, and all my parts were highlighted. It was kind of like a karaoke thing. It was pretty cool. It was fun.
Well, Jim, that story's great, by the way. So you got during Banjo, right? Like you've been doing that for
7 years.
5
I've
years
been
now,
there.
something like that.
Yeah.
7 years. How did you get into being like in the luthier side of things?
So
Did that?
when I was 14, I had a Strat, right? And
Okay, right.
yeah, it
Sounds
was
like
a
a lot
Squire
of us.
Strat. And I was, this was like 1995. That's when I was 14. So you can
Right.
do the math, figure out how old I am. But
I'm not gonna bother.
that was my first electric guitar. I'd been playing guitar for a couple of years by that time, but electric guitar was that's I got it for Christmas. Well, a couple of years went by. So, maybe a year, and I figured out like my Strat was getting harder to play, right? And I didn't know anything.
Right.
I didn't know anything about why it wasn't playing as well, but the interesting thing is my dad lives up in Boise, Idaho, and that's where I was born, but I've lived down in San Diego, California for most of my life. In the 90s, my dad was dating somebody who used to be in Prince's first band. And she had a guitar,
right.
she would lend me her amp when I would go up there, and I would bring my guitar. That way I didn't have to bring an amp on the plane. When I was a teenager, my sister and I would go visit him for the summers. And I was like, hey, my guitar doesn't play that well, but I knew she was like a professional. So I was like, she had a Strat. So I was like, what do you do? Like when your guitar doesn't play? She introduced me to a luthier that was a local guy up in Boise, Idaho.
Right.
And he had a shop in his house. He had his garage set up as a professional shop, and people would pay him. He was like the Boise, Idaho luthier, right?
Right, like everybody in the area who is a professional would go to him. Like
Right,
we all
exactly.
have that
And this
person
was-
around here.
I mean, Guitar Center certainly was in San Diego at the time, but there was no Guitar Center in Boise, Idaho at the time. It was all local shops. And
Right.
and so you not that I don't I don't trust Guitar Center techs, but yeah, but
I have
this
my
was a
doubts
guy
as well,
who
but go ahead.
he was reputable. Everybody knew him. Anyway, I took my guitar to him. He showed me how to adjust the action and set the intonation. One of my tuners was like the tuner on my high E string. The eyelet was a little bit like there was some burrs on it.
The
So
skew or whatever.
when I would tune the string down,
okay.
it would break. Which I was like, what? That's not supposed to happen.
Interesting.
But he showed me how to like Dremel it out and like smooth it out and fix it. Well, that got me fascinated, right? So I went home and I thought, I've got an electric guitar, I've got an acoustic guitar. I'm a mechanically inclined person, even as a 15-year-old, 14, 15-year-old. I just started working on stuff because I thought, well, the worst that could happen is I break it and then I have to save up a couple $100 to buy another Squire. That's the worst that can happen, right? So
I think that story like parallels a lot of people I know, but in particular, like I can remember when I got my first guitar and like the revelation, and we've talked about this on the show before, but there's a couple other instances, but the revelation that like, wait a minute, there's a truss rod here? Like I can adjust the curvature of the neck. And just the thought that you could do that was like, wait a minute. So this guitar doesn't always play the same. Like it needs adjustment, and it's something that requires ongoing maintenance. So like I've had other instruments. I played trumpet in high school and stuff, so or in middle school. So for me, it was like I didn't ever have to have that adjusted. Like this is a
Yeah.
whole other animal.
Well, I think the thing for me was in terms like the way that it transitioned into a professional thing for me was there was one time when I needed, I didn't know anything about electronics. I needed the jack replaced on my Strat at one point. And I also needed I needed the nut
Right.
replaced because it was like it cracked and it was like the piece on the side where the low E string was like literally coming off and it wouldn't play. Well, I
Right.
took it to a local guy who I'm not going to mention his name because I don't want to say anything bad about him, because he's very good. He's a very reputable guy. He's a well-respected local guy, even still. But his prices
Yeah.
were too high for me. When you're 15, I couldn't even legally work,
Yeah, dude.
right? So there was no way that I was going to be able to pay a dude $150 to like replace my nut and then the jack, like it just
Yeah.
On a guitar that costs you $150.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
to
remember my
nut.
first fret
I mean,
job,
it's-
like, and this is in the late '90s, was like $130, and I'm going, what?
Yep.
Just for regular
Well,
maintenance.
and that was exactly it. So I thought, you know what? My family has a woodworking background. I'm sure I can figure out how to work on guitars. So I just started working on my own stuff. And fast forward to when I was 23, I had been working for a custom cabinet shop. So I was well versed in woodworking and I mean fine woodworking. And I thought my brother-in-law,
Yeah.
he wasn't my brother-in-law at the time, but he is now. I was renting a room from he and his wife. He got a job at Carvin, and he said to me, "Hey, Carvin's hiring." I was having some problems with the cabinet company I was working for. They weren't paying me when I was supposed to be paid, and it was good money at the time. It was,
yeah, and a lot of smaller
Right.
shops don't like that.
Well, my hourly rate was really, really good at the time. So I kind of held on to it for a while. I didn't really want to give it up, but then at some point I figured out, you know what, I'm kind of just getting screwed because I have rent to pay and so I said, you know what, I'll just go for it. I'll go and I'll apply at Carvin. Well, they hired me, and within the first year that I worked there, I became the head of the fret and neck department. And so I headed up. I was heading up the fretting department for the next 7 years there. And
so if you pick up a Carvin from like the mid 2000s, I'm assuming there's a very good chance you had your hands on it.
if you get your hands on a Carvin from 2005, well, no, I would say maybe about 2006 through, 2005 through 2012, there's probably about a 40% chance I did the fretwork on it. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And here's the thing. So anybody can go work at Carvin or now Kiesel and get hired in the fret department, right? Any entry level person can go get hired to do frets at Kiesel. My luck of the draw, so to speak, was I got hired and I was working next to a guy who had been working there since 1986, and he was a fully licensed luthier. He and I became very, very close friends, and drinking buddies and all that good stuff. He taught me everything that he knew, everything. So by the time I was 2 years in at Carvin, I could pretty much build a guitar from the ground up. Electric, acoustic, whatever it was. I could do inlay work. I could do
right
everything. And one of the things is I was heading up the fret department, but I was also working in final assembly and doing repairs. So I was also doing a good majority of the final setups before they went out of the factory, and a lot of the electronics installations, really complex electronics installations, like all of their
Right.
like, yeah,
They have
all
some
of
crazy stuff going on over there.
all of their
yeah.
like MIDI
ISOs
synth
and all that.
electronics and all that kind. I was installing all that stuff,
Yeah.
and that was a pain because it took an hour to install the electronics on something like that, and then you'd get to the end and there would be one thing wrong with one of the piezo saddles, and you'd have to reverse engineer your whole setup. And that was even before you strung it up and did the actual
Yeah.
setup, you know, like so
Yeah, yeah.
I learned everything I would ever need to know professionally from Carvin. And you know, the thing is, I had a really good relationship with Mark Kiesel too. Um, I could go to him, and I ended up in a tough situation actually because he at one point told me, you know, Mark was running the company at the time. This was before Jeff ever was in. Jeff was in sales at the time. He wasn't
Right.
involved in anything regarding production or anything like that. So I knew him, but I never dealt with him on a professional level. Mark Kiesel and I had a really great relationship, but the problem is that because he figured out, like he knew what I was capable of, he knew my skills, he knew my attitude, he and I could talk candidly about a lot of
Right.
things. Like I could go in his office at any given time and just sit down and talk to him about something that I felt was a problem, and he would address it, you know. It was an awesome experience, but the problem is that it created a bunch of tension between me and the two managers that were there, because I was one of the few people that had a sort of permission to go over my boss's heads to go straight to the owner. And that I didn't realize it at
Right.
the time. I didn't realize the tension that was going to create at the time. I know now because I look back and I go, "Oh yeah, that was a crazy thing." But you know, it was a great company to work for, and I learned a lot uh, of what I needed to know for what I do now. And the thing is, because of my experience at Carvin, and because of my good relationship with Mark Kiesel, I was able to get myself into the position of the master repairman at Deering Banjo Company. Mark and Jeff came to visit the Deering factory about 2 years after I had been there, and I got to kind of like talk and catch up with them. And at some point through that, conversations started to happen because my bosses at Deering knew what I used to do at Carvin, and that's what ended up leading to me getting the position I have at Deering now.
Right.
So I have to be honest, I'm eternally grateful to Carvin. You know, of course, now Kiesel.
Yeah, it's just super tight. Like, and I don't think people understand that the industry is like
Oh, yeah.
super tight and close knit. And if you work
Yeah.
for somebody and you do something bad,
Oh
like,
yeah,
it's gonna follow you around.
and
vice
and it works
versa.
the same way as Taylor too. Like I mean, Taylor Guitars is also in our city, and Greg Deering and Bob Taylor are very close friends, and they actually started. I don't know if you knew this, but
Right.
they started out together. They were they were making guitars
I
in
didn't
a
know.
shop here in San Diego in the ghetto, and like, you know, they were doing yeah.
Oh, down in Nasty City?
Yeah, yeah.
What we call
yeah.
Nasty National, what
No,
is it, National City?
and
Yeah.
you know, Greg. Interestingly enough, they both played, but Greg Deering is a really good flat pick guitar player, and Bob Taylor is a pretty good banjo player. So they had like a band where Bob Taylor was playing banjo. Yeah, and yeah,
That sounds absolutely
and
asinine.
Greg Deering was playing guitar, and you know, and they still sometimes, when I first started working at Deering, you know, there'd be like jam sessions I would hear where Greg was playing guitar, and I'm like, what's happening here? Yeah,
Yeah, you're just shaking your head like, and then you look and he's playing a Taylor guitar. You know, you're like,
because he and Bob Taylor are very good friends. I mean, to give you an idea, like Deering Banjos is probably about, like distance wise, we're maybe about 4 miles from Taylor. It's a very short drive from Deering Banjos to Taylor Guitars. They're obviously a much larger company than us. We've got a building in the ghetto with about 42 people working for us. Taylor is well on their way to basically owning the entire street that they're on. They've got like exactly. Yeah.
They have a compound.
They've got like 7 buildings on the same street that are all Taylor. Their warehouse is like twice the size of our entire company's facility.
Yeah, and it's all climate controlled.
But
and insanity like that.
They broke off and started their companies the same year, and we've got a great relationship with Taylor. Like, we get help from them all the time in terms of like advice on like how to do things. And I have to say, like, I'm not the biggest Taylor guitar fan. I'm a Martin guy,
I'm hit or miss. Like some Martins, some Taylors. I'm not a big acoustic guy in general though. So
for me, the only thing that I'm not a fan of Taylor of, I think they're well built, very nice guitars, but because I have a tenor voice, when I sing and I play a Taylor,
they fight
like
frequency wise.
Yeah.
Where with a Martin, I have more of this. And so
Jim's making very strange signs with his hands. I think he just he just threw up the Black Panther salute.
Like, what the hell is he talking about?
It's the whole thing.
Yeah, no. Then with Gibson too, I have a nice, because Gibson has a very wide range of acoustics that I can kind of put my voice in those little spots.
Taylor
crispy. Is more.
Well, and
they got a lot of presence.
Like,
thank you.
This is one thing I'll say. I'm, when you're playing a Martin or a Gibson, right? You're getting a lot of that robust low end. Even when you're strumming it really hard, you're not getting a whole lot of, a Taylor guitar is essentially a really expensive shaker. Right? Because that's when you're strumming a Taylor guitar, you're getting, in a mix.
Yeah. You might as well just take a Martin and put a dollar bill through the strings
Johnny
like
Cash
Johnny Cash,
Yeah.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah.
That's how,
I don't know. Yeah, that would make sense for sure.
I don't know.
I wonder.
Maybe.
Yeah. Anyway, well, so we talked about Taylor. We talked about all these other companies that are like in the area where you're at. The question I had for you though is like, so Deering has about, you said like 45 people?
Well, I think right now we probably have a little under 40, but we tend to float in the high 30s, early 40s.
And you guys produce, based on what I was seeing, like 30 something, 40 something models. It's not an. I don't want to say it's not an extensive product line because that's not true. It is an extensive product line. My thing is like, I think there's a tendency for people who are not involved in the industry to look at a company and say, "Oh, well, if they have 100 products, there must be 1,000 people working there, and it's this big company." And like, no, it's not. Like, there's literally 40 people working it during Banjo. It's not a ton.
Well, it's all about production numbers. Like a company our size. You can look at, again, going back to Taylor. You can look at Taylor and you go, those guys. They're Monday through Friday. They're doing 3 shifts per day. They're running all the time.
Yeah, and they could be putting out 1,000 guitars a day.
I think last time I talked to the guys at Taylor, which was about 4 years ago, and asked their numbers, they were telling me that they're averaging about 600 to 800 guitars a day. That's insane.
Yeah, I believe that. Wow. And yet that's we've talked about it. Like, so 600 to 800 guitars a day. Where are they going?
That's yeah.
Where are they going? Because if you do the math, think about how many per year. They've got to be in a landfill somewhere.
Well,
I mean,
this is the crazy thing too. Like, you got at Taylor, you've got multiple people doing the same exact job. This is the difference.
Right.
At Deering, you've got like each person that works at Deering is doing one job, and that's the only person.
Yeah, like one person does inlays, one person does frets,
and that's the only person who's doing
exactly.
That. Now, some people are cross-trained, so they can be floaters, and they can, in case we're shorthanded, or if somebody leaves or has to get fired, or if somebody's sick, somebody's got to be able to step in.
I'm sure you guys have a lot of cross-training going on, and it's just word of mouth, and like you're rounded enough.
Well, but I mean, I'll give you an example. This is one of the bigger differences in a small company versus a big company. Is a company like ours, we have one guy who, he's been working at Deering for 22 years now, I think. He's definitely not our longest time employee. Our longest time employee is a guy named Chuck, who just reached his 40-year anniversary with the company. If you look online and you see all the banjos with the carved heels, like all the engraved carved, he does all that by hand.
Okay.
That's the one guy who does all that, and he does all of the custom engraved inlay work. The Banjosaurus, he's the guy that does the inlay work on that, and he does it by hand. It's not
That's insane. Because go to if you're listening to this episode, go take a minute, stop what you're doing, go look at the Banjosaurus.
Yeah, you got to go to Banjo's private collection, and it's the bottom one called the Banjosaurus.
Yeah, the
I kind of like the Gabriella, which is half the price.
Yeah.
Go big or go home.
I'll get back to the Gabriella in a second, but just to give you an idea of the way a small company works versus a big company, like when I was at Carvin's like a mid-size, they're not a big company, but they're not a small company either. They're like right in that in-between. They're not as...
They're like 100 employees, maybe between 80
When I was working there, we had about 150. Yeah, but that may not be true now because that was back when Carvin and Kiesel.
Oh, when they had that's right, when they had the amplifiers and the PA stuff and all that. Because I thought the last time I saw it was like 70 something employees.
Yeah, and they split off into different companies. So if I had to guess, with Kiesel guitars, and I don't know, it's been 7 years since I worked there, so
sure.
But if I had to guess, I would say they're probably about double the size we are. They're probably usually floating around 75 to 85 employees, I would guess. And again, I don't know. I'm just pulling.
That sounds about right.
Yeah,
but that sounds about right. I mean,
sure.
They're kind of a smaller niche brand, and so that sounds right.
But when I worked at Carvin, for instance, so if somebody was gone for the day, there were probably 3 other guys that were already doing that job, so anybody could just maybe 2 or 3 guys would pick up a couple of extra guitars per day and just kind of hustle a little bit extra, and that's it. Maybe in rare occasions, maybe stay an hour of overtime and just get it done. But at Deering, if somebody's out, a lot of times, literally, the vice president is stepping out into the shop and actually like sanding necks. Or even Janet Deering. Janet's the CEO. It's not uncommon to walk out into the shop after shop hours and see her out there sanding good time necks. Because the mentality at Deering is we just have to get it done, right? Yeah, and there's no there's no elitism. Right. There's no like. I'm not saying there is at Carvin. I'm not saying that at all. But
no. Well, it's really cool though, because you think about it, like, everybody wants to believe that when you bought a G&L from the late 80s, right, that Leo somehow blessed it, right? But it, like Deering, I mean, Janet Deering
Yes,
might have
yeah,
actually
exactly.
sanded the back of the neck. You know, I mean, it's
Yeah.
it's a very cool thing when you think
and the
about
thing
it.
is too at Deering,
So-
like Greg and Janet are still very, very, very much involved in the company. They're not just owners making decisions and handing them down. They're at the factory every day. My workbench is next to Greg Deering's workbench. So Greg and I are often working alongside each other on banjos. And it's really cool because he tells me stories from like back in the day when they used to work out of their garage, you know. And Jamie Deering, she's a few years older than me, but you know, I think she's like 2 years older than me, I think. Um I had a banjo in the shop a couple of weeks ago that was a 1992 John Hartford signature banjo, right? It's a pretty popular model, but it was,
Okay.
you know, to get one from 1992, it's, you know, that's from back when like John Hartford was still alive. The head was signed by Earl Scruggs. And the thing is that Jamie was able to look at that banjo and go, "Oh, I worked on that one. I buffed that one." You know, and that's kind of cool. You know, I think there's something to be said about a company that, and you know, when you get bigger, you can't really blame companies for not doing this when they get to a certain size, because it gets to a point where you just can't. You can't. It's right.
Well, yeah,
It's not possible.
the
It's not
number of
possible.
customers, it would just be impossible.
Sure. No, and I don't think that should discourage
No.
people from, like, say, buying from somebody like Fender. If they got the product you want,
absolutely.
it's the product you want, right? It may not have like the crazy mythological status, but I honestly think we often prescribe too much to that as musicians. That like there's some sort
I think
of
so
special
too, yeah.
mojo that happened in the production of an instrument.
So I want to say something before we go too far, and because of the fact that I defend my Guitar Center a lot, so I'm going to say this about the person that heads up our repair department. He used to work for Gibson, and he's gone through Gibson's training. And now some people might go, "Well, that makes it even worse." Right?
Is he bandsawing your guitars in half?
I saw him out back with a front loader
that's
and
where
a
that
backhoe.
$40,000 SRV tribute electric went.
Whoops. But no, I just wanted to say that we are lucky, I guess, because we have. First of all, they didn't even have repairs there. Just a couple years ago,
No,
there were no repairs.
That's been a pretty
at my
recent
Guitar
thing
Center.
for Guitar Center as a brand in general. Like what I remember,
Yeah.
our local store had a deal with another shop actually in the city that rented space in their building to do repair work.
Yeah, so I don't know if it's the same with all Guitar Centers, but our Guitar Center, he's an independent
Yeah, and I think
contractor.
that is because even the instructors are independent contractors. That's so they don't have to do
so
the
he
tax
doesn't actually
paperwork.
work for. Yeah, he doesn't actually work for Guitar Center. He works for. He gets paid by him, obviously, just like I don't work for the Coast Guard. I
Yeah.
work for a company, but the Coast Guard gives money to the company to give money to me to get something done. I feel sorry for those people. Okay, so I got to ask you a couple of questions because we're coming up on. We've been an hour and 40 minutes, and I want to. Yeah, so I want to respect your time. So I got to ask you a couple of questions that. So as far you don't have to give any names. I don't want any names, but what is the most interesting repair or customization, as you mentioned earlier, that you've had to do? I just find it funny that to get a customization done, I would actually get a guitar that was brand new, but it would be repaired. But anyway, so what is the most interesting story that you can kind of give us about, you know, a banjo that's come in? You said, "Oh, I had to do this to a banjo."
You know, I don't want to be boring here, but I've never actually really gotten too many crazy things that I can talk about. There have been some things, but I'm not allowed to speak about them officially.
I've seen some stuff. I've done some things.
There are some things that I've had to work on.
Not yet.
and I'll give you, just to give you some context here. The reason I can't talk about them is literally because these are
Okay.
products that are in development that are like intended to be kind of trademarked things that are not. I don't have permission to speak about them.
Right.
Yeah,
I'm not at
but you
liberty
know,
to discuss them yet.
yeah, but you know, I've
Once they
gotten
become
some
declassified.
I've gotten some interesting like I think probably the most complex repair I've ever gotten was we had an artist that wanted he had an existing banjo and he wanted side dots installed that had LEDs behind them that would light up so that when he was on stage, you know.
Well, that's just
Yeah.
just be an hour. Pretty soon
Yeah.
you're routing a chassis into the back of the
Well,
neck so you can run wires through
You know,
it.
I'll tell you
like-
what, it was a pain because we had to figure out how to get those wires from the neck. He needed a switch installed in the inside of the banjo's rim to turn on and off, and with
Okay.
a battery pack on it, right? So, and then he also wanted the 12th fret inlay lit up. So yeah, so
Naturally,
we had to take the
naturally.
fingerboard off of it and route a channel for the wires all the way down the fingerboard. Well, the funny thing is, this thing was, I mean, it was bad. We got it done, and I don't know how much you guys know or don't know about banjos, but that fifth string, there are various different ways of capoing that string to change the drone note. You know,
Right.
if you're going to play in the key of A and you need to capo on the second fret, you either have to tune that string up a full step or you have to find some way to capo it. Well, one of the ways to capo it is to install these little tiny railroad spikes, and you tuck the string under. And that's kind of tricky in itself because you have to install it so that it doesn't get in the way of fretting the note if you want to, and it also can't be above the fret surface because then it'll buzz, right? So it's a tricky thing in itself, but we got this done, and this artist wanted railroad spikes installed on frets 6 through 10, right? Well, the final assembly guys installed the railroad spikes, and the railroad spike, one of them went into the wiring for the LEDs. So we had
great.
to redo the whole thing, and we not only did we have to redo it, it happened in a way where it was like, okay, well, the spike has to go right there. So essentially what happened was the routing for the channel for the wires was miscalculated, and we had to rebuild an entire neck for this guy.
Oh.
And then after that was done, I had to figure out how to run the wires from the neck through the rim without getting pinched by the tone ring and all that kind of stuff to be mounted on the inside of the rim in a way that was easily accessible for this guy on stage. That's probably about the craziest thing I've had to do.
Let's back up for a second. Let's think about this for a moment. What kind of a banjo player? Because banjo's a pretty traditional instrument, right? It has light up 12th fret and light up inlays for the side dots.
Yeah, Steve.
Like, is this Steve Vai? Like, what? I mean, I can't even imagine. Like, what kind of music are you going to play with a banjo that lights up like this? I mean,
You know, yeah. No,
like
you'd be
virtuoso
surprised though.
banjo.
We have a lot of people that do some pretty creative stuff with banjos that very closely bumps up on the border of just
like shred.
and I mean, this guy,
Yeah.
he's like a bluegrass player, but the thing is he does a lot of stuff where he's playing, like, they have elaborate stage sets and they have like lighting and stuff where sometimes the lights are off and he just needs to be able to know where he is, and yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Actually,
yeah.
Kiesel does the luminolay now, and that's one of the features on my 7
Yeah.
string that I absolutely love. It actually saved my bacon last night. Because the place we were at, like they had all the crazy
Yeah.
stage lighting, and it was really dark to the point
Oh,
where I
man.
couldn't see the settings on my effects pedals. So it's like,
Yeah.
well then, so but it we do actually usually ask one more question, right, Jim? We got the one last one.
But wait, I
No,
gotta ask him
so
a different question
you
now,
do
because I want to get one before we get to that
Okay,
final
all right,
question.
fine.
We don't have
Come
the
on.
pizza question,
Come
by
on.
the way, so you don't have to worry about that. Although
No,
we
no,
will
we don't-
ask
we're
you
not
where
gonna
your
ask you
favorite
about
tacos
pizza.
come from, because you are in San Diego and you gotta tell us that. Because when I get out,
Yeah,
we're gonna be coming out. Hopefully,
kind of important.
hopefully we'll make NAM, and we wanna try to
Oh yeah.
find some cool stuff to do while we're out there. So maybe we'll see you. But so I got to ask you another question. So you came from was it Kiesel when you left, or was it still Carvin when you left? It was still Carvin.
It was still Carvin. There's an interesting thing that the company, I don't know if you know this, but the company actually started as Kiesel
Right.
in the 40s. Lowell
Right.
Kiesel. Now here's I feel like I worked at the company at a good time because I worked under Mark Kiesel when Lowell Kiesel was still alive.
hmm
So I knew Lowell Kiesel.
right.
I went to his memorial and all that stuff. I remember like when he died.
Right. He's Jeff's
So-
grandfather, right?
Yeah. So I got to meet Lowell Kiesel and I got to speak
Yes.
with him a number of times, and like he was a lap steel player. He was like a Hawaiian lap steel player.
Mhm.
And back in the day when Carvin first started, they were making amps and pickups and lap steel guitars. Now Mark
Yeah.
Kiesel, I was in his office one time and he handed me a guitar that was essentially a dobro, but it didn't have an aluminum cone, like resonator cone. It had a wood one. It was like an all wood dobro that was set up to place like
Interesting.
that his dad had made when he was 15, and I got to play that thing.
Sure.
So I feel like I got to work for the company in a really good time. I worked there. It was still Carvin at the time. I want to say about maybe a year and a half to 2 years after I left. That's when they started introducing the Kiesel
The Kiesel shift.
models, but the company was still Carvin. Then they actually reacquired
Right.
the Kiesel name and would still make Carvin branded guitars before they actually did the full
Yeah.
shift to now where everything is just Kiesel. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a very interesting thing how all that happened, and I have a lot of maybe we'll talk about sometime offline. I have a lot of very interesting I wonder if this is why this happened, kind of thing. But it's all speculation,
Yeah.
so I'm not going to put it on the podcast, and it doesn't really mean anything because honestly, Kiesel, I think Kiesel's
Yeah,
making
so do I.
excellent instruments today, and every Carvin I've played has
Yeah.
been great.
Yeah.
too. So
They've definitely. There was a time when a Kiesel, or well, say a Carvin used, was the used market was not very good, but Jeff Kiesel has really made it so the used market on Carvin Kiesels it has come back incredibly.
Yeah.
yeah, dude, I think I would take like a
Yeah.
$50 hit if I
Really
sold my
good.
Zeus.
So
So
we have our final question that we get to ask everybody, and you don't have to answer. You don't have to say anything. We got to ask you for.
I hope
We
he
got to
does.
ask you
I
for your
hope, 'cause it's always
funniest,
my favorite
most
question.
embarrassing story. It can be of your time at Kiesel. It can be of your or Carvin. It can be
Something
when you've
crazy
been,
that happened to you.
backing up somebody on stage, or as a session, or anything like that. Don't have to. Yeah, no
Don't have to
names.
name names.
Well, it's funny because I'll give you my most embarrassing work story. It might not seem that crazy, but it was a moment that I never lived down as long as I worked at Carvin. I was working on an Alan Holdsworth signature guitar that was actually for Alan Holdsworth. And I this was the stupidest thing ever. the guy that glued the nut on had used way too much glue, so I was trying to chisel it off. And I was doing this in a way where I was holding the headstock and I was chiseling the glue off, like with the chisel pointed towards like the webbing between my first finger and my thumb.
Oh,
I
can see where this is going.
Yes, yes. Your guess as to where it's going is probably accurate. Well, here, what happened was, now this was a freshly sharpened chisel, right?
Yes.
The nut popped off, and the chisel went straight into the webbing between my thumb and my first finger, about a half-inch deep, and it was a half-inch wide chisel, so it wasn't a small wound.
No,
Now,
you were probably bleeding everywhere.
I've nicked myself with chisels plenty of times, so as sharp as the chisel was, it didn't feel that bad.
Yeah.
But I was like, I better check it anyway. So I looked, and I'm like, I could see all the things inside my hand. I was like, nope, I'm not supposed to see that.
Nope.
And it wasn't even bleeding
Medic!
yet. Yeah, it wasn't even bleeding yet until about 2 seconds later, all the blood started to come out. My whole left forearm, this was my left hand, right? So as a guitar player, it's like, this is my fretting hand. And I'm like, this is the worst. All the blood starts coming out. My whole left forearm is covered in blood, just dripping off my elbow. And
yeah.
all. And here's the thing, like, you know, if you've ever worked in a factory, you know the kind of people that work in a factory, they're just like, wow, look what happened to Miller. You know?
Like,
you know, and I'm just sitting there going,
yes.
Meanwhile, you know, it's like I'm the head of a department, right? So I'm supposed to be like, I'm supposed to be the guy that doesn't do stuff like that. That's supposed to happen to the new guys, right? Sitting here. So I put a cloth in my hand. I stumbled over to the sink, washed it out. I started getting the tunnel vision because I lost a lot of blood, so I was starting to get
right.
a little,
Oh yeah.
You know, I was starting to get weak, and I sit down in my boss's office, and I was like, I have to go to the hospital. And next thing I know, I wake up like probably about 30 seconds later. It wasn't that long of a time, but I had passed out, and the head tech as well as Mark Kiesel were standing over me, like trying to wave in front of my face, their hands to get my attention. Now, this was about 3 days before Halloween, and apparently I was very pale.
Yeah.
And because of what just happened. And Mark, the first thing that happens to me, I come to, and I'm like, I figure out what's going on, and Mark Kiesel looks at me and he goes, you know, Halloween's not till Saturday. You're not supposed to be a ghost yet. You know?
Holy crap.
Yeah, so I had to be the, well, now this is the thing. If you hurt yourself at Carvin, there was shame attached, because well, and I certainly wasn't the worst. There was one person who was working in the cabinet department, and they stapled their hand to a cabinet while putting the Tolex on a speaker cabinet.
I believe it. I've seen crazy stuff like that, man.
Yeah.
We had somebody, I worked for a company that used to make luggage racks, and we had somebody do something similar. We also had people shear off fingers in shearing machines.
Oh yeah.
And in one case, like the dude so he wasn't following the proper policy. They got lockout, tag out, and all that. And anyway, but he cuts off the tip of, I believe it was his middle finger. And of course they rush him, and apparently he's a temp, right? And the funny part was, he starts, I'm going to sue you and all this stuff, until he's asked for ID. He wasn't 18 yet. He wasn't even supposed to be working there. The guy didn't even have a case. It was like, you lied to be here. You were being unsafe, and you cut off the tip of your finger. Go home.
Whoops.
We had so on the USS Mississippi, we had a guy. We worked in really high voltage. I was in the weapons systems, and it was this 19,000 volt section of a transmitter, and we had something called a bar circuit that when you opened it up, it was supposed to automatically discharge all the capacitors. Now, anybody who's ever grabbed a capacitor that some jerk, right, charged up and handed to you knows how that feels, right? Imagine 19,000 volts on one of these things, right? Their capacitor is as big as your forearm. So this crowbar circuit, I guess, didn't discharge everything. we had it lockout tagout, but you're supposed to go through with this huge device. You put a glove on. You were supposed to discharge all the points. Must have missed a point to discharge to check. So we reached in to do something. And you're never supposed to, even completely off and discharge, never supposed to put your hand inside that thing, right? He puts his hand in there with a regular oscilloscope probe, and there's this pow. I hear pow, and I see the spark, and his hand flies back like this, and he gets knocked back. And I said, "What did you do?" And this was his response: "I just did this."
Oh. Oh man.
I was like, "Wow, there is no end to your stupid."
That's the kind of person that you should just remove from the gene pool.
Yeah,
right
I
now.
told the other
You
guy,
have,
I go,
yeah.
"Now you take him and you walk him to medical. Don't leave his side.
And
take
then
him to
psych
medical."
after that.
And then I'm calling medical. Luckily, we were on a nuclear guided missile cruiser. We actual surgeon there, so just in case anything happened. And because if you ever get shocked on a ship, they have to hook you up to an EKG and do all this other stuff. So
Yeah.
it was just one of those things that was like, how could you, you know? But when
It's
I was
not funny, but it is.
when I was a little boy, my father bought me a knife, right? And he was like, oh, he's in the, I don't remember what it was called, but it was right before Cub Scouts. It was like mini Scouts or something. I don't know, like mini wheats. I can't remember, but we were doing the derby thing where you carve a soapbox derby thing, and he gave me my block of wood and my brand new buck 112 or buck 110. And so this knife, and I start to carve, and I cut off the end of my finger.
Oh man.
Well, we're not going to let you have a knife for a little while. My mother freaked out so bad. I mean, the number of cuts I have today, you'd never know.
All right.
I could never do anything right.
Before we end, I'm going to tell you my knife story. So when I got my first knife, I got a buck knife.
Yep.
From it was my dad and my uncle, and we were living on their farm for a while he was in between jobs, and he gives me this knife, and he says, you're of the age you can have a knife, right? I was probably 12ish, right, 10, 12ish. But the thing is, they blunted it, and they didn't really blunt it all that well. So, like, looking back now, I got knives now. Like, I don't collect them, but I use them all the time. And I'm like, you really think about it, you blunted a knife, and that makes it dangerous. So you actually made it more dangerous than if you gave me a sharp one. If you really think about it.
Yeah, for sure.
Not such a good idea.
Yeah.
So, anyway.
That's the thing about that pain, though, Sam. Like you were talking about.
You don't feel it.
You don't feel it when it happens.
When it's super sharp. Yep. Well, that's the funny thing. I was like, the fact. Now, I used to sharpen my chisels so that I could dry shave my arm with them. That's how I tested them.
Yeah.
That's how I tested them. I'm like, okay, chisel. Because when you're working with wood and stuff, like you want it that sharp because then it's super accurate. It's easy to work with. Well, the thing is, if you stab yourself in the hand like I did, it doesn't feel as bad as it is.
And it cuts deeper.
It cuts deeper. It cuts easier. But the thing is that the doctors told me, too, they're like, look, it's actually better that it was sharper because then it's easier to mend it. Because if it's dull, then it tears everything. And it's better to have it's better to have a clean cut than it is to have like tearing.
Yep.
Right.
So I have a little scar, but yeah, I mean, the thing it sucked. I couldn't play guitar for like 8 weeks, I
was going to ask you about that. So a couple months out of the guitar, right?
You know what happened? The funny thing is that the band I was playing in at the time, I changed my role in the band for a little bit. I was only playing either slide guitar or harmonica the entire time that my hand was injured, and then I switched back to normal guitar after.
Nice.
That worked.
Worked. Was there any learning curve, like when you went back to it, you were like, "Oh man, this is a little weird"? No.
No.
So you got 100% back.
I mean, well, I wouldn't say 100%. I wouldn't say there was 100% no learning. Like it felt weird just because I hadn't played in 8 weeks.
Yep.
Like there was that weird. It's like I went on a trip one time where I didn't drive my car for a month, and then I came back.
Yeah, and the first time you get in the car, you're like, what?
Yeah, it feels weird, but it comes right back, right?
Yeah.
It was kind of like that. Yeah.
Well, I'm more on the shred guitar end of things, right? Like that's the kind of music I play.
Mhm.
And I can say legitimately that if I don't play for like 2 days and I pick up the guitar, I literally lose some of what I'm able to do.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So if I had like an 8-week injury like that, I would be furious. It would just be
Yeah.
angry as hell.
No, I get that because my guitar playing is I don't I used to do like when I was learning to play I was playing a lot of like Pantera and stuff like that.
Yeah, that kind of stuff, right?
I used to be able to do all that stuff, but I personally just got, as far as what I wanted to do, I still love it and appreciate it for listening, but as far as what I wanted to play, I got really disinterested in all that kind of shred stuff.
Yeah.
So for anything I'm doing on guitar, there's nothing that I'm doing that's on that level. So I could go for a couple of weeks without playing and be fine. Right. But I feel it when I don't I get that on synthesizer. When I'm playing my synths.
Yeah.
If I'm not practicing daily, if I miss a couple days on that, it's a weird thing because it's my second instrument, so I have to stay on top of it.
You really have to keep the chops up, right?
I really do. I have to. I didn't grow up playing piano, so it's all, especially in my right hand.
Yep.
There's a lot of weird stuff where if I don't stay on top, so yeah, I get that with keyboards. But like I said, the stuff I play on guitar, it's the kind of stuff I play is more along the lines of like, I don't know. It's easy. It's not. I don't do anything too difficult.
And I don't want to like downplay that and be like, oh well,
sure,
because I'm a high level player and like I'm not. But I do play. Like last night, I played an open mic and I thought I bombed. Like it was like I was like, oh, it's just the wrong crowd. Like not the music for this crowd. And some guy comes up to me and he like taps me on the shoulder and he's like, that was really good. He's like, that sounded like Vai and Satriani. And I looked at him and I was like, no, it didn't. No, it didn't. But I get what you're saying. Yeah. I appreciate it. Yeah. but no, it didn't. I don't know. So it's just something I've noticed. And like, I hear people having these long-term injuries. There's somebody else in a group that cut themselves and they were talking about, having to have stitches and nerve repair and all kinds of other stuff going on. And I'm going, man, like I could not imagine being told I couldn't play the guitar for like 8 weeks. Like it's just nuts. But anyway, I think I speak for the both of us when I say it's been great having you on the show.
Oh yeah.
Thank you.
And we barely scratched the surface of all the things you got to do your own podcast thing and tell people about all this stuff that you do. It's fantastic.
We'd love to have you back at some point. Like we're always open to like if we get more luthier type stuff or like we've had Nick Bongers on the show from Great Lakes Guitar Pickups. And
cool.
He's our show's like main sponsor. And he we'll bring him on to consult about guitar pickups if there's a big topic related to guitar pickups. Like he'll come on and help us out. And
anytime. I've had a great. This is my second experience being on a podcast. Yeah. So
we try to keep it natural and we don't try to like sugarcoat things. You see my cats running around behind me all episode. I got this big thing over here because my bathroom is a straight shot from this door. My daughter was getting ready to go to bed for the night. Yeah. So I'm like, I'm not. Yeah. Yeah. But we let it all hang out and we're not afraid to kind of be ourselves and let our guests be themselves.
Cool.
So
yeah, no, that's what I like. So yeah, anytime you guys feel like you want to have me on, just reach out and I'm
for sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
This was a lot of fun. We got to talk to you about the live stuff and the session stuff too.
Yeah,
we didn't even scratch the surface of that.
True.
Yeah. All right, man. I have been David.
I've been Jim.
And I have been and still am Sam.
All right.
And tonight we've all been the Practical Guitarist.